All right, some of this I'm going to send you home with, and we won't spend time in class, but let me explain the pieces parts that you have. There is one that is simply the equivalent of a Xerox. This is a section where Chemnitz traces the first genus through all the history of the church, and one of the sections is Luther. That's what I grabbed. Luther commenting on this first genus as he is doing work with the biblical text. The first page is 2/3 blank, the first face, and it's page 190. We're not going to be going through that this morning, but just so you've got it, that's Luther using it in various passages. All right? The next one, which we'll not go through in detail, but maybe have time for Q&A on it next time we meet, is headed Christ Jesus. This I literally lifted out of what is called the Lutheran Encyclopedia. Dr. Brandt last week said, could you give us something that sort of talks about these three genera and defines them and tells us what's going on here? And I said, sure, I'll get it to you next week. So this is available online. That's where I got it. Went to the LCMS website, which I never do. And the key to it is the bottom of page 3 and all of page 4. I gave you more than is the subject of our class, but the subject of our class, bottom half of page 3, the communication of the attributes, D. So mark for yourself, I'll take a look at that. This is sort of dictionary definition stuff. Okay? And I just threw in the rest of it. It's a whole article on Christology. Why not? As long as we're at this. Next one is an outline of chapter 15, Chemnitz, distinguishing particles or expressions. Now, this, if you're at all familiar with the Lutheran confessions, we use this sort of machinery, particularly with regard to the doctrine of justification. If you're working with the Lutheran confessions, particularly something like the apology or defense of the Augsburg Confession, you'll find that Melanchthon and others give just detailed work in why the full formula is by grace alone, through faith alone, on account of Christ's death and work alone, and so forth. And they just squeeze this like blood out of a turnip. And to give you an illustration of how we can sort of skip over the importance of the prepositions, we can take literally the translation of the New Testament, which has shorthand versions, justification by faith. Biblical text, justification by faith. And in the American scene, what you get is the understanding that my faith saves me. And the Book of Concord will correct that. It's Christ in His blood that saves you, not even your faith. When we talk about sola fide, or faith in Christ nude, or faith in Christ without works, or faith in Christ alone, the emphasis is on a particular syllable, Christ, not our faith. Our faith, the Luther compared and others did, to a beggar's hand that receives the gift. But the emphasis is not on my faith. The emphasis is on Christ who died for me. You say, gee, isn't this more detail than anybody wants to know? Well, try being thrown back for your assurance on the strength of your faith sometime. Try it in the hospital. And what I will need and what you will need as we lie there dying is a pastor who will tell us that Christ's death saves us, not our faith. Huh? So when they're squeezing these things, these distinguishing particles or expressions, it's actually got to do with what justifies us and to even remove from the board my faith. Does that make sense? The one is objective, the other is subjective. And the Lutherans want to stress the objective, Christ bleeding, Christ dying, not your strength of faith or weakness of it. I know that sounds theoretical, but it isn't. When push comes to shove, it ain't theoretical. When somebody looks at you and your pastor looks at you and says, I don't think I have any faith at all. And the clock's ticking. What he has is Christ and his cross and his blood, and he's going to try and replace your faith with Christ and his death and his blood to your assurance. Right? Now, I think that other national groups probably aren't as vulnerable to this as Americans. I have tried to repent in sackcloth and ashes. I tell the story to my students that when I was young, I was a boy soprano, and brides would ask me to sing at their wedding. Lord have mercy. And they would give me something like, I Believe, a perfectly awful song from back in the 50s, truly vomit-worthy. I believe that for every drop of rain that falls, a flower grows. I believe that even in the darkest night, a candle glows. I believe for everyone who goes astray, someone will come to show the way. The American's vulnerable to that kind of crap. Huh? This is as far from the Reformation as you can possibly get. Maybe one rung lower on the ladder, the closing line of Gone with the Wind. Well, there's always tomorrow. When the New Testament is talking about pistis, the Greek word for faith, it's talking about putting a wooden stake through the vampire heart of my virtues, which suck, and instead being twisted to all I've got's Christ and his blood. At least in column A. The judgment, justification before the holy God. Virtues gotta die and be replaced with somebody else and what they did. So that's why these long sort of linguistic twisting of the machinery of the biblical verses counts. And only somebody who has looked in the darkness, like in the haunted house, and seen those eyes blinking back that say, you have no faith. You're a hypocrite. Your faith is faked. I know it. You know it. Luther knew this well. He called them the Anfechtungen. And it's almost untranslatable. Terrors of hell. What he was trying to get across was, even in his later years, wakening in the middle of the night and saying, the devil saying, Luther, you've led all these people to hell, and it's your fault. Not only will you go there, you'll have led them all there with you. Terrors, night terrors, Anfechtungen. So this linguistic squeezing of the prepositional phrases is to make sure that we're using all of what St. Paul has to say to get us returned, rotated toward Christ and his cross outside of us, and away from our faith within us. So I'll leave it to you to look at during the week, and then I'll open next time maybe with time for, if you looked at it, something you'd like to ask about it. But it's the difference between an objective gospel and a subjective one. Okay? Most of America is involved with a subjective gospel of feel-good, or payoff, or victory, or rising, or you name it. I try to get across to our students, look, if your basic service you're attending is headed upwards, it ain't Lutheran. The basic direction in classical Lutheran theology is God reaching down and giving free gifts, not your rising to meet him. Let the evangelicals do that. If they want to fly and glide, let them do it. But it ain't the Reformation. Okay? All right. Now, let's look at the one we'll look at today, chapter 16, the use of this doctrine of the first genus. It's headed Chemnitz, the use of this doctrine of the first genus. And we won't have time to do all the details, but at least we can cover the major that he's arguing. First of all, introduction. Nobody get the idea that it's mere idle subtlety to exercise care in speaking concerning the correct use of this doctrine. First, it will help us to hold and confess the correct faith concerning the one person and the two natures. Second, by observing these rules concerning the communication of the attributes, we separate ourselves from all fanatic, the German is Schwärmerei, literally swarmers. The Anabaptists, we would say Pentecostals, not Baptists so much as Pentecostal. Fanatic opinions pertaining to either Christ's person or his natures. Now that I guess we can look at in a little detail. Say a Nestorian or a Eutychian seems to be hiding something. The danger is that he might mislead the uncautious by his use of general terms. The norm of this doctrine may be applied for all to see. Deception can be discovered, exposed, and refuted. His major protagonist here is Nestorius, D. And his charge is that the reason Nestorius was thrown out of the church on his patootie was that he ended up with two Jesuses, two Christs, one man and one God. He was schizoid. He was a multi-personality. He was Sybil. And that was rightly thrown out. In the background here is hovering the Reformed. Okay? So you can read the quotes on that. And then the one that he and we are going to be charged with on top of page 2, Eutyches. And he's going to tackle that with biblical phrase and say, the church was right to have thrown him out on his patootie too. Why? Because the natures were mixed, and Jesus was neither fully God nor fully man, but some new substance, maybe called God-man. But he wasn't God and he wasn't man anymore. It was some sort of a commingling, and he said the church was right to throw that one out too. We're neither. Third, without the support of this doctrine, many passages of Scripture cannot be correctly interpreted or defended against the corruptions of heretics. Now, here is where you see the thing drawn from the verses, and it isn't generalized or philosophical language. He's going to actually apply it to particular verses and how the heretics use those verses to come to conclusions they ought not to have come to. So he does it in detail there. The first one, Jeremiah 23:6, and from this some imagine only the divine nature of Christ is our righteousness. Then 1 Timothy 2:5, the one mediator between God and men, the man Christ Jesus. From this others imagine this means that only the human nature of Christ is our mediator. 1 Corinthians 15, the second man from heaven, and John 3:13, the Son of Man descended from heaven. and what the Manichaeans did with those verses. And then Luke 1:35, that which is born of you shall be called the Son of God. Some imagine from this that the Son of God did not exist before the Virgin Mary. 1 Corinthians 2:8, the Lord of glory was crucified, and what the heretics did with that. Okay? So there's the sort of thing. He's traced the history of exegesis through the heretics to say, this is what's been done with the verses, and it is not necessary, and it's bad scholarship. Right? What we know as creedal Christianity survives bad exegesis and has been delivered to us through the work of many, many in the whole history of the Western Christian Church for free. Costs them dearly, but it's given to us served on a platter. Here, you've been redeemed by somebody, one individual, one afternoon, who is true God, true man, one person, dying for you, dying for your sin, and it's as sure as his resurrection from the dead that your resurrection will follow. Be of good cheer. This is where the Lutherans are at their best. There are places where we're really at our worst. This is not one of them. Okay? Even those who are not from our circles will say, nobody's done this the way the Lutherans have. Nobody's done the work on it the way they have. I don't think I'm talking out of school. We had a gathering years and years ago at Cambridge, Massachusetts, to draw up what we called the Cambridge Statement. We had every seminary professor from every Baptist seminary you can imagine in America to see who would sign on to sola gratia, sola fide, sola Christus, who will sign on to that. And it was everybody who was there. Well, we needed, the first night, of course, a place to have drinks and cigars. So we asked Dr. Preuss. He had some palatial suite, asked if we could use it, and he said, sure. So I got there a little bit late, and there was Dr. Horton and 6 LCMS seminary profs surrounding him, everybody with drinks, and the subject was Christology. This stuff. And Mike looked up and smiled at me as I walked into the room and said, I'll bet you love this, Rod. Well, this is our strong suit. This is our strong suit. The Christology, the cross, and the nature of justification. That's our major, more than anybody else. Fourth, these modes of speaking teach us many useful things about the mystery of the incarnation and redemption. And great use of the scripture text underneath that. And then the closing exposition. Therefore, God, whom we call the Lord, the Son of God, and the Logos, by the conception of his own flesh and by his nativity, can be said, because of the hypostatic union, to have been conceived and born of the Virgin Mary, who is therefore correctly called the mother of the Lord and the God-bearer. I think I've mentioned this before. Quick digression. In an earlier century, the way in which the deity of Christ was defended was over a fight over whether Mary was Theotokos or God-bearer. And that can sort of throw somebody like me. I worry that I might have been on the wrong side of that. But it was the way in which they were arguing the full deity of Christ was Mary the God-bearer. Not that she bore the Father, but she bore the Son, who was fully God, so that we can say she was the God-bearer. It was the way they fought the fight in that century. But we will lose this great comfort if we imagine that only a man or mere flesh born of the Virgin Mary did this for us, and not the incarnate God, Emmanuel. And yet remember that the difference of the natures remains unmingled. In the same way, it is also true that the nature of the Logos, that is, the deity itself, is not torn by the scourges or pierced by the nails or wounded by the spear, for these are properties of the flesh. And then finally, Nor should we believe that Christ's passion is to be attributed to the deity only by any figure of speech. We're talking about what actually took place. That the divine and human Messiah was crucified for us and for our sin one afternoon, and that's going to work. It's another way of defending justification, okay, for free. All right, let me stop it with that. You can take a look at some of the detail work, and I'll try to remember next time to leave some time for questions on the other pages if you want to look at them during the week, and bring something up when we meet together next time. Let me throw it open for questions, preferably on the subject. Not astronomy or calculus. All right.
Doctor, you mentioned the third genus coming up. Is that in the future yet?
Yes, and it's where the marbles are.
That's the marbles. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could define for us, when we read the word nature here, in the third C, under 6C, in the same way it is the true nature of the Logos, that is the deity itself, is not torn by the scourges or pierced by the nails or wounded by the spear. So we talk about, it seems to be that you're talking about one nature, this happened to, another nature, that happened to. Can you define for us what you mean by nature?
Yeah, well, that's, go back to Dr. Brandt's work. That was that chapter 1 that had to do with here's the linguistics of what we're going to do in the rest of the book, because he was the one who did that. If you get the readout of chapter 1, it's the analysis of, I'm going to have to use some words here, and here's how I'm going to use them. But I will make comment, that's as close as Chemnitz gets to talking about the natures, one and the other. You'll read that over and over again in the pass out from Luther. We particularly want to say, when in doubt, talk about the whole Christ, including those both of those natures. We get nervous when we start hearing people talk about the one nature did this and the other nature did that. It isn't that we won't do it at all, but we walk very, very carefully. Other Christians think this is not a problem at all, and Lutherans think it is.
What does nature mean?
Well, Dale, what do you think?
The nature of a thing is
Its essence?
its essence. Yeah, nature is
what makes it what it is.
Yeah,
Aristotle?
and it's what you can't take away from a thing without destroying it. So, what he's saying here is that it's the nature of flesh. Let me see. Where is you're on 6C? Mm-hmm. Right. It's the nature of flesh to be
Pierced.
torn and pierced and all that. It's not the nature of the
Divinity.
logos.
Yeah,
Logos. It's I mean, in some sense, it's not even the nature of the soul of man to be torn and stuff, because that's also not
Right.
flesh.
Right. Right. I think that's
Now,
as close as we can get.
If I can follow up on
Sure,
that
go.
that issue,
Sure.
does the logos feel the pain though?
Well, I'm going to make reference. You might as well know this. I'm going to make reference to a very old heresy. If you want to impress your friends and confound your enemies, it's patripassionism.
It's one of the oldest heresies there is.
I don't know. It could
Pretty
be
old.
Anyway, we will walk the edge of that. That is, we are talking about that somehow the Father is not disaffected by the death of his Son, isolated off from it. That's as much as I'll say, or I'll walk right into that heresy. But we did not like the Father being separated from the Son. When we talk about the crucifixion, we're talking about the Father giving his only Son into death for our sakes. And we'll sort of walk the edge of that heresy. We're more worried about Aristotle's God or the God of the deists, who is completely unaffected by you, whether you know it or not. The early American deists tried to start a church. And it's hard to gather a church when the God whom you're worshiping is completely disinterested in you, and prayer is silly. That one scares us more than maybe having our toe in the water of patripassionism. Does that make any sense?
It does, but this would be, I'm actually asking about the Son, the Logos, whether he felt the pain.
Oh, I'd have to look in Chemnitz to see if he actually, I doubt that he talked that way. Plus, he's always more interested in talking about the person, you know. That's part of what this book is about. It's a minefield, and you'd be better off to not say certain things than to enter into the minefield and blow up. I don't think we'll find a lot of passages like that in his book where he starts dealing with that. And the obvious is, the further you get from the text itself, the more speculative it's becoming. And part of our problem is we love to speculate. Well, the theologians ought to be the ones in the front of the room saying, you know, I don't know a verse on that, so I don't know. We ought to be the leaders, and in general, we don't talk like that because we hate saying the phrase, I don't know. We like to be the ones who are encyclopedic in front of the crowds. Bosh. It is highly godly to say, I don't know. Scripture doesn't tell me. I hope that you'll pick up that all of this technical language, really what all of those early guys had in mind was that our assurance would be solid. That our assurance that we were justified in spite of our sin, and deep it is, that Christ is greater. That Christ is greater than our sin. They were doing in the detail work what they said they wanted to do when they spoke more generally. That is, Christianity is deeply about Christ, and it's not primarily about you or me. It's about him and what he did, given what we've gotten ourselves into. In other words, we are the problem, not the answer. Americans hate this. But we have made ourselves the problem from way back in Genesis 3 all the way forward. God, who would have had every right to erase the world and say, I'm going to start over, didn't. And at great cost to him, redeemed us. In the concrete, in person, to death. And what they're going to try and get across, and this is going to continue throughout this volume, is you can die with just that, and it's going to work. It's going to work. Just what? Your faith? Not finally. Just Christ. Just Christ and his death and cross. Okay? We just, in the detail work and in the general propositions, wanted to defend that 33 ways from Friday. Now, if you imagine that this is available in any old church in America, I'm going to disappoint you because it isn't. Even some great churches won't have the emphasis on this syllable. They won't. One of the even liberal Lutheran guys complains in one of his books that there's too much talk about God apart from Christ. And the Lutherans don't want to do that. Or we want to self-correct if we do. We want to talk about that particular one who became flesh in Christ and for a particular purpose, and he told us 33 ways from Friday what it was, and it was to die. I came to die. Not to teach, though that's there, I came to die. And this has to do with you and me and coffins and dirt and what the pastor's saying as you look down in there. Free justification. All right. Well, then thanks for your attention. Any more questions? Take a look at the paper if you want to. Is that a raised hand, Craig? Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Rosenblatt, on page 4, we've got the by his own hypostatic union, and that term keeps coming up. What do other denominations, they reject that term hypostatic union, and what would their,
The closest
what is their union?
The
or what do they have?
closest, good question. The closest is Rome, and they won't. They said, we've got no problem here with this when we published it. And of the others, it's the classically Reformed who will use the phrase hypostatic union, but they don't mean the same thing. If Luther tended toward the Eutychian side, the Calvinists tend toward the Nestorian side, and that's part of what's in the background of this book. And it's going to come full bloom in the supper. It's going to come. This is why R.C. stood up that time when I did a seminar at a Ligonier conference, and stood up that evening in the first plenary session and said, and on this, Rosenblatt's wrong. And I said to him afterwards, you know, I wasn't doing Rosenblattianism, R.C. This happens to be from Chemnitz, and it's how we do Christology. And he laughed, and he I think knew that, but he said to me, if you had 1,800 Christians and a live mic, would you have done it to me? I said, absolutely. So the phrase hypostatic union is there, but certainly not communication of attributes. Certainly not that.
Maybe it would help if you could tell us, what is a hypostasis? Right, there's
why I assigned that to you.
Yeah. I think that the hypostasis is what we also call the person.
Yes. That's the best English rendering I know.
So
Yes.
I mean, in some ways, this term, it sounds very impressive, hypostatic union, but just remember that a hypostasis is a person.
Yes.
So we're talking about the person of Christ.
Yes.
When we talk about the hypostatic union.
Right. Yeah. All right. Oh, Art, another one?
Yeah.
Thanks, Jim.
You've mentioned Dr. Sproul, R.C. Sproul, many times.
Mm-hmm.
And from what you just said, though, it sounds like he also will be saved.
Oh, sure.
There you go.
Sure.
Right. Thank you.
Sure, and then he'll become Lutheran in heaven. They say the same thing of us. They say the same thing of us. Rosenblatt will be reformed when he gets to heaven. And they don't mean morally, they mean Calvinism. I'll be reformed the other way, too. Anyway. All right, thanks for your attention. Hope it's of help to you.